I've learned a hard lesson about how easily an ordinary man's daily life can spiral into chaos. The events in this story began a few years ago. At the time, my family consisted of my wife, who was 38, me, Larry Dragon, aged 42, and our two children, Angelica, 8, and Elliot, 6. While we weren't the happiest family in our Scandinavian capital city, we managed to keep things together, probably because we believed staying united was best for our kids. Everything changed when I ran into an old classmate, Tom Homer, on a Friday after work at the liquor store. I hadn't seen Tom in a couple of years. Since the store was particularly crowded that day, we had plenty of time to catch up. To our surprise, we discovered that Tom's wife, Cecilia, worked at the same office where my wife had been employed for the past 6 months. "You weren't at the Christmas party," Tom said. "Are you coming to their old owner's farewell party?" I replied, "I'd like to, but I wasn't invited." Tom looked surprised. "Of course you're invited. All spouses are. Why wouldn't you be? I'll double-check, but you can count on it. See you there, mate." The party, just 2.5 months after the Christmas event, was to celebrate the old owners selling their shares to a nationwide investment company. It was a way to thank the staff before the new management officially took over on March 1st. Of course, I remembered the Christmas party. It had been the first event at her new job. She told me she was sorry I wasn't invited, bought a new, sexy dress for the occasion, and left the house looking stunning. She didn't return until 4 a.m., tipsy and disheveled. After some arguing, she insisted nothing inappropriate had happened, claiming she had spent the later hours at a friend's house for drinks. Despite my doubts, I had no evidence to challenge her story, so I let it go. Back home from the store, I told her about meeting Tom Homer. "His wife works at your office," I said, watching her carefully. She replied nonchalantly, "What's her name?" "Cecilia Homer. Do you know her?" "No, I don't," she said quickly. "Did he say she knows me?" "No, but he mentioned that all spouses were invited to your Christmas party." I paused, staring at her. "So, who pretended to be your spouse that night? And where did you really spend the rest of it?" She stiffened before replying, "I've told you before. I thought spouses weren't invited. I was new, and I didn't understand the invitation." "Seriously? So you were the only one in the company who couldn't figure out a simple invitation? I'll find out who lied to you after the party, and trust me, he'll regret it." She began to cry. "I've told you 1,000 times. After the party, a group of us, maybe 12 or 15 people, went to someone's house. We had a few drinks, danced a little. That's all. No reason for you to be so mad or jealous." Her story was full of holes, but I couldn't do much without proof. "Am I invited to the next company party?" I asked. She hesitated, just for a second, before replying, "Of course. I booked us both. I just forgot to mention it." Her response didn't sit right with me, but I left it at that. Needless to say, our marriage had grown cold. Any intimacy between us seemed like a distant memory, and our relationship was barely holding together. Then, things got worse. The following Friday, I took the afternoon off work to run some errands. Since my wife typically left work early on Fridays, we were both at home when the phone rang. I picked up, but the caller hung up without saying a word. In the background, I had heard upbeat dance music, as though the person was in a car. "Who was it?" she asked. "Your lover," I said jokingly. He hung up when he heard my voice. To my surprise, she froze for a moment before yelling, "What's wrong with you? Why would you say that?" "It was just a joke," I said. "But now, seeing your reaction, I don't know what to think." She calmed herself and replied softly, "It wasn't right to joke about that. It felt like another one of your jealous accusations. I've had a terrible day at work, and I'm sorry for losing my temper. I wasn't convinced. Something felt off. Later that evening, when we finally headed to the company party, she wore a much less revealing dress than the one from Christmas. She was quiet, far from cheerful, and clearly not in the mood to celebrate. The party was held at one of the best hotels in town, with dinner served at several round tables rather than the usual long ones. We were seated with 4 other couples, and I got the distinct impression that I knew some of the other women. Throughout the evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that my presence was an inconvenience to my wife, as though I had disrupted her plans for the night. After the meal, as we were enjoying coffee and a glass of cognac, the boss approached our table for some small talk. Seeing me next to her, he said, "You must be her husband. We missed you at the Christmas party. Sorry you couldn't make it." I replied, "I wasn't invited to that party, or at least that's what she told me." His expression shifted slightly as he looked at her. "All spouses were invited. How could you have missed that?" I decided to push further. "Well," I said, "she came home very late that night in a terrible state. I'm guessing she preferred someone else from the office over me." A few of the other couples couldn't resist chuckling at my remark, while my wife turned as red as a tomato. The boss, clearly uncomfortable, muttered, "I don't know anything about that," before quickly excusing himself. Unable to stop myself, I added sarcastically, "You ought to know. There are 304 employees in all the offices, right?" At this point, my wife's embarrassment was palpable. The other couples at the table, sensing the awkwardness, excused themselves and left for the restroom. I followed suit, heading to the restroom to gather my thoughts. While there, I struck up a brief conversation with one of the other husbands who had been sitting at our table. He mentioned that his wife had once commented on my wife's noble, old-fashioned sounding surname, which had stuck with him. He then revealed something that made my stomach churn. His wife had noticed my wife at the Christmas party, spending the entire evening very close to one of her male co-workers. I had never expected to find myself in such a situation, but, as many men before me had learned, sometimes the painful truth about a cheating spouse comes out by accident. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Yes, I had noticed that the spark between my wife and me had been dim lately, but I had brushed it off as a natural phase in marriage, one of those ups and downs that all couples experience. I'd been hopeful things would improve with time. When I returned to the table, my wife was gone. One of her co-workers mentioned she had left the party early and wasn't answering her phone. Concerned, I called the babysitter, but there was no answer at our house. It became clear that my wife had gone home and sent the babysitter away. I stayed at the bar for a while longer, trying to maintain my composure. Thankfully, no one else brought up what had happened during dinner. When I finally returned home, I found her sleeping in our bed. The next day turned out to be the worst in our 11 years of marriage. I shouted and screamed, demanding to know where she had been and with whom on the night of the Christmas party. She refused to answer. Her silence only fueled my anger, but no matter how much I pressed, she wouldn't budge. By Monday morning, things were no better. She went to work as if nothing had happened, and, to her relief, no one at her office seemed to care about the scene I'd made during dinner. Even her boss appeared to view it as a private issue. What her co-workers whispered behind her back was another story entirely. The next surprise came later that week on Friday night. She initiated sex for the first time in months. Not only that, but she was far more enthusiastic and adventurous than usual, which took me by surprise. The night was unexpectedly satisfying for both of us, and for a brief moment, I felt like we had rediscovered some of the passion we'd lost. Still, I couldn't ignore the nagging thoughts in my head. Was her sudden interest in intimacy a way to make amends for something? Or was it driven by guilt? I fell asleep shortly after, but my mind was far too restless to allow me a peaceful rest. Over the next week, things seemed to improve slightly. Our interactions were less tense, and I started to believe that our marriage might be on the mend. But then, everything came crashing down again. One morning, I noticed she had dressed up more than usual for work. Her hair was neatly styled, and she had put extra effort into her appearance. During breakfast, she casually mentioned, "Oh, I forgot to tell you. My boss mentioned I might need to work some overtime today." Something about her tone, combined with her appearance, felt off. I couldn't keep my suspicions to myself. "Since when do you need to dress extra sexy to work overtime?" I asked. "Why don't you just tell me the truth, that you're planning to see your lover again?" Her face betrayed her shock before she could mask it. "Have you gone completely mad?" she shouted. "You seriously need help for this paranoid behavior. Maybe it's better if we end this marriage, so you can stop accusing me of things that aren't true." I shot back, "I might be mad, but I'm not so mad that I'd stay married to a cheating wife." She burst into tears, and before I knew it, our children were crying loudly too. The weight of what I'd done hit me like a freight train. I had started the most serious fight of our marriage without a shred of evidence. After a sleepless night, I found myself consumed by frustration and regret. She had been crying, and between her sobs, she asked, "Do you really want a divorce?" "Yes," I replied. "I can't see any other solution. If you intend to keep making a mess of this marriage, it's best for both of us to split up and move on with our lives. I'm fed up with being treated like a fool. Believe me, I've had enough." I stormed back to the bedroom, feeling a pang of remorse for accusing her of cheating without any evidence. I realized I had acted impulsively, like a caveman, and completely mishandled the situation. Instead of confronting her with baseless accusations, I should have collected evidence first. When I returned to the kitchen a few minutes later, she was dressed as usual for an average day. She didn't say a word to me, and I didn't know what to say to her either. It hit me that only a miracle could save our marriage. If she was innocent, she could hardly endure the humiliation I'd recently put her through. If she was guilty, our marriage was as good as over the moment I found proof. That evening, she told me she had informed her boss that I had refused to let her work overtime. According to her, he had accepted this explanation because he remembered me from the party. I should have called her boss to verify, but I didn't. To my great relief, an unexpected twist of fate worked in my favor. The new owners of her company conducted a secret investigation into employee internet use. They found that, on average, employees were spending 52 minutes a day on private matters. The worst offender had spent a staggering 16 hours online in just 1 week. The following Monday, the entire office staff was called to a meeting where they were informed of strict new rules prohibiting personal use of company computers. The changes also led to the termination of the 4 most recently hired employees. She managed to keep her job, but from that point forward, she had to use the home computer for all personal emails. This was an opportunity one couldn't let slip. I had already prepared our shared computer with a mirror program that saved copies of everything she did and a retrieval program that recovered deleted files. I was ready. Within a few days, she activated a new free email account, Happy COR Lad, in addition to her old Hotmail address, which she used for casual and innocent chats with friends who had moved away. The new account contained only a few messages initially, mostly junk mail, but her first sent emails were innocent enough, merely notifying Happy COR Lad of her new email address and confirming she was available online again. Even his first reply, which she had deleted, wasn't overly revealing. "Great to have my darling online again." But one thing was clear. She was involved in something. I suspected they might rely on their phones for private communication. especially now that her online activity was limited to our home computer. However, I felt confident that she would prefer email for longer messages. This gave me hope that I could uncover the truth. At the same time, I decided I wouldn't allow her to walk away with half of our assets if her infidelity caused our divorce. I had worked too hard to provide a comfortable life for our family, and I wasn't about to let some lover boy reap the benefits of my efforts. I started developing a plan to protect my finances. As the sole owner of our house, I could take out a significant loan without needing her approval. To my surprise, the bank was more than willing to grant me the funds. The next day, I told her I needed to travel to Italy for negotiations regarding the purchase of a new machine for work. She had no objections, as I'd taken similar trips in the past. However, instead of heading to Italy, I went to a local travel agency and purchased a cheap airline ticket to Malaga, Spain. I also had them book a hotel room in Gibraltar, a British territory notorious for being a hub of money laundering in Europe. To maintain appearances, I booked additional tickets from Gibraltar to London and from London back home. As expected, she didn't contact my workplace to verify my 3-day leave. When I arrived in Malaga, I took a local bus to La Linea, the Spanish border town near Gibraltar. From there, I crossed into Gibraltar, but I didn't transfer any money. The only thing I did was take a sightseeing tour around the famous Rock of Gibraltar. The next morning, I caught the first flight to London and then returned home. During the trip, I paid for as much as possible using my private MasterCard. This way, if anyone ever investigated my expenses, they would find a plausible explanation for the trip. Once back home, I resumed monitoring her computer activity. So far, there hadn't been much of note. The most significant message was from Happy Lad, who wrote, "I'm sitting alone in a hotel room, wishing you were here to comfort me." She didn't reply to him via email, so I decided to check her cell phone while she was in the shower. As usual, all her messages had been deleted. Then, finally, I caught a breakthrough. His next email contained the information I had been waiting for. "Hi, love. Sorry, I've been busy meeting important customers here in the north, far from you. During those days when your stupid husband was supposedly in Italy, I missed your hot lips and sweet box terribly. Every evening, knowing you were waiting for me was torture. But I have good news for us. Next Wednesday, I'll have a whole day off in town, and the only thing I have booked is a dentist appointment from 9 a.m. to around 10 a.m. The rest of the day is just for us, my darling. Just you and me. Please take the day off at least from 11 a.m. and spend it with me. Frederick." Now I knew his name and profession, and it gave me hope that she would reply via email. She did, and her reply confirmed my worst fears. "Dear Frederick, of course, I'll take the day off after 11 a.m. May I suggest a romantic lunch at your place, so that people don't see us together in town? Larry still suspects something, so keeping our timeouts has been the right thing to do if we want to keep our love a secret. However, I agree that breaking our timeout just this once will be worth it. I've been thinking about you often, and I'm looking forward to our great day together. Love." And her message shattered any remaining doubts. I now had enough proof to confirm my suspicions. To my satisfaction, I had already taken precautions to prepare for the worst. I'd found an apartment to rent and paid for a year in advance, just in case there were complications with the authorities during the divorce process. Frederick was a common name, and being a salesman in our town wasn't enough to easily identify him. I suspected he might work for the same company as her, but without further details, I had no way of confirming it. My only option was to tail her and find his location myself. I also knew that she and Frederick likely used their cell phones for most of their communication, given how limited her email use had been. But now that she was restricted to using only the shared computer at home, I felt she'd eventually slip up. I needed to stay patient. At the same time, I began to move assets. I emptied our joint and private bank accounts, transferring the funds to secure, undisclosed locations. I also rented a van with dark-tinted windows to prepare for the confrontation I knew was coming. When her Great Wednesday finally arrived, she acted completely normal in the morning. She dressed as she usually did, nothing flashy or suggestive, and even styled her hair in a routine way. I began to hope she had canceled her plans. Still, I couldn't hide my stress. She noticed and asked, "Are you all right? You don't look well." What could I say? "I'm fine," I replied. "I've just been thinking about a few minor problems I need to fix today, but everything is under control." She looked concerned. "You're so pale. Don't worry so much. By the way, it would be nice to have lunch together today so we can talk about some important matters." Her suggestion caught me off guard. For a moment, I thought she might have really canceled her plans. But then, as she hesitated and avoided my gaze, I realized the truth. "I'd like that too," I said, "but I understand if your important matters take priority." She flushed and stammered, "I'd love to have lunch with you, but I already have an important lunch meeting at work. Tomorrow would be better." I stared into her eyes. "I see. Well, of course, important things must come first." Her face turned pale. She had clearly understood my double meaning. I hoped, for a fleeting moment, that she might reconsider her plans. But deep down, I knew what was coming. After breakfast, she left for work, taking Elliot to preschool on her way. Angelica went to her school, and I stayed home to prepare. By 10:30, I had the van strategically parked outside her workplace, where I could see both her car and the personnel entrance. Thanks to the dark-tinted windows, I was invisible inside. At 11:05, she exited the building, got into her car, and drove straight to a residential area just outside the town center. She parked in front of an apartment building and walked inside. I followed her and saw the name Frederick Albinson listed on the second-floor information board. I gave her 5 minutes before I called her cell phone. She answered immediately, her tone slightly irritated. "What's your problem, Larry?" I replied calmly, "My love, you are my biggest problem." She sounded confused. "Have you gone insane?" "No, darling," I said, "but I found your lover boy's apartment, and I know you're with him right now. I'm on my way to beat the crap out of him, so you'd better get dressed and leave his place before I get there." There was a pause before she replied, her voice shaky. "What are you talking about?" "I'm at work, like I told you." I could hear the fear in her voice, but she was trying to maintain her composure. I ended the call and stood outside Frederick's door, holding a sledgehammer and a black garbage bag. As I had anticipated, about a minute later, a man in his mid-30s opened the door. I was ready, my right fist connected with his face hard, catching him completely off guard. The force of the punch made him stumble backward into his apartment, pale and shocked. She was standing behind him, frozen. I barked, "Damn 304, get out of here now." Before she could react, I shoved her out of the apartment and slammed the door shut, locking it behind her. Now it was just Frederick and me. I unleashed my rage, raining punches on him until he collapsed onto the floor. Under different circumstances, I'm sure this younger man, fit and in good shape, would have had the upper hand. But the element of surprise, combined with my anger over my ruined marriage, tipped the scales in my favor. Beating and kicking him was an easy match. When he finally lay motionless on the floor, I grabbed the sledgehammer and destroyed everything of value in the small, simply furnished one-room apartment. It was clear to me that this wasn't his real home. So, I took Frederick's cell phone and some documents containing his home address and personal information from his briefcase. Still standing outside the door, I rang the doorbell and yelled, "Don't kill him! Don't kill him!" I then opened the door and dragged her back into the apartment. Pointing to him, I said, "He's yours now. Go ahead and screw him as much as you want. I don't care about you anymore." She stood there in shock, her eyes darting around at the wrecked apartment and Frederick's battered body. As she stammered, "Please let me explain. Please listen to me, Larry." I cut her off, told her to shut up, and walked out to the van. Inside the van, I went through Frederick's papers and discovered that he worked as a salesman for the same company as her. But his real home was with his family near the national capital. That explained the small apartment in our town. Frederick had destroyed my marriage, and as the Bible says, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. I had one thing left to do. First, I called her parents and asked them to take care of the kids after school, explaining that I had to work overtime and deal with some personal issues. They agreed without hesitation. Then, I turned off my cell phone and left for a 2-day leisure trip with the rented van. I regret to say that I can't share anything about that trip in this story. This forum has many readers in Scandinavia, likely including those investigating my actions. Innocent people could get dragged into this if I said too much. 2 days later, back in my hometown, I turned my phone back on and saw countless missed calls and messages. I listened to them all but ignored them. My only response to her was a simple text message. "I've filed for divorce. That is my final decision." The rest of the day, I spent moving my clothes and personal belongings from our house to my new apartment. Before leaving, I placed a copy of the divorce papers on the kitchen table. Frederick's affair with her had clearly lasted for months. If it had only been a one-time drunken fling at a Christmas party, there might have been a slim chance of forgiveness. Or, if she had listened to what I said during our last family breakfast and canceled her date with him, she could have saved him from the severe beating I gave him. The next day, I returned to work as usual. Surprisingly, she didn't call me. The only call I received regarding Frederick was from the police, requesting to speak with me. Since both she and I had busy schedules, we arranged a time to meet 3 weeks later. During lunch that day, I called her mother. She told me the kids were staying at her place for a few days and that she had no objections to the divorce. 3 days later, she finally called me, furious. She screamed about her net worth being reduced to 0 and threatened to sue me for destroying Frederick's home. I calmly told her, "Lost money can be replaced, but our lost love and broken family? That's something that will never come back." She wasn't satisfied with my response. 3 weeks later, I went to the police station with my lawyer. The meeting was polite and uneventful. The police accused me of beating Frederick so badly he couldn't work for 2 weeks and of destroying his apartment and house. I denied everything, except claiming self-defense when her angry, desperate lover attacked me while I was interrupting their date. The officer seemed to do his job without much enthusiasm. He didn't appear eager to prosecute me, likely because he had little sympathy for a cheating wife and her lover. I didn't care much about the outcome. Even if I were found guilty and ordered to compensate Frederick, it wouldn't benefit him. Without money, it would simply be a piece of paper granting him the legal right to demand payment. His problem, not the legal systems. To my surprise, she contacted me and suggested a meeting. We had a meeting at the restaurant to talk about our children. I managed to keep things civil, but she surprised me with a confession. She admitted to having an affair with Frederick, which had begun just a few weeks after she started her new job. During a reorganization in the sales department, she became Frederick's secretary, and tension had almost immediately sparked between them. A lunch at his small apartment quickly led to his bed, and after that, they continued their affair whenever opportunities arose, though those chances were limited as Frederick only occasionally visited the main office. When Frederick's wife couldn't attend the company Christmas party, he saw it as the perfect chance to spend nearly the entire night with her. She admitted she had serious doubts about it, but eventually agreed, calling it the most foolish mistake of her life. Despite the affair, she insisted that I and the family had always been her first priority. She claimed she had never stopped loving me, even when I started accusing her of cheating. She told me they had planned to end the affair the day I confronted and attacked Frederick. She had even thought of ways to reward me for being a loyal husband when she became a faithful wife again. She then confessed that Frederick had made plans to live with her after his wife left him. However, she said she was willing to end it immediately if I promised to give her another chance. I told her I was sorry, but her betrayal had hurt me too deeply. We agreed that she would have primary custody of the children, but they would be free to see me whenever they wanted. After a pause, she hesitated and asked about the money. I noticed tears in her eyes when I told her that I had lost everything through foolish speculations. That, I said, was the price of her decision to leave me. But I added that the cost I paid, losing my family, was far greater than the loss of money. I promised that I would try to rebuild the family if I ever came to terms with her betrayal and accepted her apology. However, I made it clear that I preferred her as an ex-wife rather than living with a cheating wife. Before we parted, I warned her that hiring a lawyer to chase after my lost money would cost her dearly and ultimately yield nothing. The following Monday at work, my secretary, Sarah, walked in, and I immediately noticed something was wrong. She was wearing sunglasses, and when she took them off, I saw the dark bruise under her left eye. It was obvious she had been crying a lot over the weekend. At first, she refused to tell me anything, but after some coaxing, she admitted, "I'm a single mom now. Daniel and I have split up." I was stunned. I had always seen Sarah and Daniel as the perfect couple. I asked her what happened, and she replied, "To be hit by your husband once is terrible, but it can sometimes be forgiven as a mistake. When it happens a second time, though, it's no longer a mistake. It's a habit. And a habit like that can't be tolerated or forgiven. A man who hits his wife twice will keep doing it for smaller reasons if she doesn't leave him. Daniel hit me for the second time, and I'm divorcing him." I was shocked. I thought Daniel was a good guy. What happened? Why did he turn into someone like this? Her voice shook as she explained. "He's jealous. The first time he hit me was after I danced a tango with a South American guest at a wedding. It was just an innocent dance. He was an amazing dancer, and no one else's husband seemed to mind their wives dancing with him. But Daniel got so angry that he hit me afterward. I forgave him and warned him that the next time would be the last. He promised it wouldn't happen again, but it did." I asked cautiously, "What happened this time?" She hesitated before answering. "This time, it's because of you." I froze, utterly confused. "Me? How could this have anything to do with me?" Her words came out painfully. "Daniel thinks you and I had an affair." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You and I had what? An affair? Why didn't anyone tell me? When and how could I have been involved in an affair without even knowing it?" She sighed. "You're not the only one. Neither of us knew anything about this so-called affair. But we should have been the first to know, don't you think?" I was baffled. I had always admired Sarah. Sure, but I had never acted inappropriately toward her. I never made any suggestive comments or advances. And, frankly, if I'd ever had to choose, I might have preferred Sarah over my ex-wife. But admiration and fantasy are entirely different from action. Why didn't Daniel talk to me about this? I've never cheated on anyone, let alone with you. Sure, I've faced my share of temptations, but I've never acted on them. Where did he even get such ridiculous rumors? Sarah looked defeated. I don't know, but he believed them. And now we're getting a divorce. Some of David's friends had apparently heard rumors and told him about them. I couldn't understand why he hadn't simply asked Sarah or me. How could he be so incredibly foolish? I said. Sarah shook her head in disbelief. That sounds insane. She tried to laugh and asked, So, now that your dream girl is single, what's the plan? Your place or mine? Mine will be fine, I replied with a smile. Deal, she said, smirking. After an hour of light conversation, she asked quietly, Are you still serious about our date? I gave her my warmest smile and said, I don't intend to run away. What you offered me today. Well, that only happens once in a lifetime. Are you sure I even offered you anything? She teased. No, I said honestly. And I'm not demanding anything. But a date is a date, right? She nodded. Okay. A date will be a date. Though we joked about our new single lives, both of us knew this could be a day that changed everything. The tension between us grew, and by lunchtime, she decided to take the rest of the day off. Later that evening, I didn't expect her to actually come over, but at 6 o'clock, my doorbell rang. Sarah stood there with a small overnight bag in her hand. Just in case you were serious about our date, she said with a soft smile. I am, I replied. She told me her day had been terrible. She'd had a tough meeting with her lawyer. I suggested she rest while I prepared dinner. After dinner, we sat on the sofa, talking about our failed marriages. She asked me several times if I would ever take him back, and each time, I told her it was out of the question. We went to bed early, but I made no attempts to initiate anything intimate. To my surprise, she slept soundly and felt slightly better the next morning. The following weekend, we decided to rent a minivan and take our children to the zoo together, her 2 kids and my 2 kids. To our relief and delight, the day went far better than we had expected. It became clear that blending our families might actually work. On Sunday evening, after Sarah dropped her kids off at her parents' house and I left mine with their mother, we had a romantic dinner at one of the city's best restaurants. Back at my apartment, as soon as the door closed, we started kissing passionately. Clothes came off quickly, and we tumbled into bed. She made no attempt to stop it, and for the first time, we let it all happen. Afterward, as we rested, we continued with tender lovemaking in different positions. Sarah told me she was happy because our first time together had been wonderful, intense yet full of real love. Both of us were satisfied, especially me, because Sarah was far more affectionate and engaging than and had been during the last months of our marriage. Meanwhile, Anne's lawyer had found out about my confrontation with Frederick and tried to use it against me during the divorce proceedings. I was questioned extensively about the incident, but I stuck to the simple truth, and no evidence could be used against me. Though Anne's lawyer also spent considerable time investigating my lost money, the divorce ended as expected, and got 50% of nothing and was left with a huge debt to her lawyer. During one of our meetings about the children, Anne tearfully confronted me. How could you take all our money? How could you do that to me? I replied, How could you betray me? How could you do that to me? Her response surprised me, because I was an idiot. It was the worst mistake I ever made in my life. Does Frederick know you regret your affair with him? I asked. She nodded. He regrets his part in this mess too. Even he has paid a high price for it. But you must be happy now with Sarah. I am happy, I said. But it wasn't Sarah's or my choice to be divorced. Both of us would have preferred for our children to grow up in homes with both parents. Still, we are grateful for each other and determined to make it work. Frederick eventually bought my old house for a high price, taking on all the loans, which left him and Anne with much higher monthly expenses than I'd ever had. Sarah's husband bought out her share of their house at a fair price, and she used that money to invest in a new home, where we moved in together. The police didn't ask me further questions about the damages to Frederick's house. Such matters weren't a priority at the time, given their limited resources and difficulties coordinating between counties. I heard rumors that the house had been owned solely by Frederick's wife, and she had even taken the bulk of the insurance money. I was ordered to pay compensation to Frederick for the beating and damages to his small apartment in our town, but I never paid him anything, and I have no intention of doing so. Of course, I promised to pay him as soon as I had the money, but since I didn't, there was nothing the authorities could do to help him collect it. Sarah and I both quit our old jobs, and she started her own consulting company where I now work part-time. I drive a company car and live as a lodger in her house. It's a good solution for both of us, and she hasn't given up trying to track down my lost money. One evening, and invited Sarah and me to a pub to discuss the children. After a few drinks, and began asking Sarah about the missing money. Sarah, with her characteristic calmness, simply told her the truth. She neither knew anything about the money nor cared. Because, Sarah said, he's the best bargain I've ever had in my life. Sarah and I have always worked well together, and now we've built a wonderful family relationship. There's plenty of fun, warmth, and yes, amazing intimacy between us. My children adore Sarah, and her children like me. Life was going smoothly until I started hearing rumors around town. Apparently, David had been bragging about winning Sarah back. I knew David had been attending expensive weekly therapy sessions and was now boasting that he was cured of his past problems. Still, I didn't mention any of it to Sarah. I decided to let her handle the matter in her own way. Meanwhile, David's parents had not accepted Sarah's decision to leave their son. They made several attempts to lure her back to him, frequently calling and offering lavish promises, a new car, an expensive holiday to South Africa, if she would return to David. One evening, Sarah came to me with a worried expression. "I've been invited to David's younger sister's wedding," she said. "I'd like to go, but if you have any objections, I'll stay home." "Why would I have any objections?" I asked. "I'm worried that David's parents will try to use the wedding to push us back together. A romantic event like that would be the perfect opportunity for them to persuade me," she admitted. "But I was really close to his sister and I'd like to go. If it's okay with you." I shrugged. "You're a big girl. If you want to go, you should go. I think it'd be nice for you to celebrate her big day." Sarah hesitated. "The thing is, I suspect there might be drinking, and I might have to stay overnight." "Aren't you worried about that?" "Why should I be?" I replied. "I trust you completely. You're a big girl, and I know you can take care of yourself." She smiled warmly. "I love you so much." David's hometown was about 60 kilometers away, so Sarah left early on Saturday morning, planning to return sometime Sunday. I didn't ask her for any details. It was her decision how to handle everything. We agreed to minimize phone calls, and she promised to let me know when she arrived safely. Before leaving, she gave me a hug and a kiss. Of course, I spent that Saturday with a heavy heart, trying not to show my fear. Anything could happen during her trip, and I knew Sarah would face intense pressure from David, his parents, and their friends. I reminded myself that I trusted her and that she was more than capable of taking care of herself. I spent most of the day with my kids, then went out for dinner and a beer with some acquaintances at a local pub. I didn't stay long and returned home to watch a comedy DVD before heading to bed. To my surprise, Sarah came home earlier than expected, at 10 a.m. on Sunday. She gave me a warm hug and whispered, "Follow me to the bedroom." Once there, she threw herself onto the bed, dragged me down on top of her, and whispered, "Oh, I love you so much. Make love to me." I didn't hesitate. Moments later, as we lay in bed, catching our breath, she smiled mischievously. "Did I shock you by coming home horny as hell?" "You gave me a very pleasant surprise," I replied, grinning. "I love you so much, for trusting me, and for letting me support your decision to go to the wedding. I know there must have been temptations and efforts to win you back." She nodded. "Yes, there were. But I handled it." Then she told me what had happened. During the wedding festivities, she learned from the bride that David's parents had made arrangements for Sarah and David to share a small room with only one bed after the party. The bride had given Sarah this inside information, probably thinking it would be helpful. Though Sarah had expected David's parents might try something, she had booked a hotel room in advance. She left the wedding party when the drunken suggestions about taking David back became too frequent to ignore. Skipping the Sunday dinner with David's family, she checked out of the hotel early and drove home after breakfast. One thing was certain: Sarah and I had a very good relationship. Last week, when Anne and I met at a cafe to discuss the next few months for the kids, I noticed she seemed more unhappy than usual. When I asked if she and Frederick were having problems, she hesitated before admitting, "Yes, we are. I wouldn't hesitate for a second to say yes if you asked me to come back to you," she added. I wasn't surprised, as the kids had already mentioned stories of disagreements between Anne and Frederick. "I have to ask," I said. "He cheated on his wife before, and I'm certain you weren't his only affair during that time. Is he cheating on you now?" And began to cry and, through sobs, admitted, "Yes, I think so." Story. Over the years, I used to believe that with age, people gain knowledge, learn from their mistakes, and grow wiser. But unfortunately, that isn't always the case. Some people lack the moral strength to honor the love and support given to them by someone who has stood by them for years. My name is Troy Evans, and until recently my life seemed normal, at least by most standards. My wife, Sarah, and I had been together for over 30 years. During those years, we worked hard to take the good from life and instill values of honesty and ambition in our 3 children. Greg, the eldest, Christine, our daughter, and Amanda, the youngest, now 24. We loved and nurtured them, doing our best to give them a strong upbringing. But time flies. Before we knew it, they had grown up and gone their separate ways. Christine got married and moved to another state with her husband. Amanda, meanwhile, decided to settle nearby with her own family. Greg, my only son, always dreamed of becoming a pilot. He eventually enlisted and remained in service until recently. But my story took a different turn. For years, I worked in the police force. I wasn't the kind of officer who spent hours buried in paperwork. I stayed in good physical shape and enjoyed patrolling the streets or responding to crime scenes with my partner. Some of those moments were dangerous, but I thrived on the challenge. That is, until 2 years ago when tragedy struck. During an operation, I was caught in a shootout. A bullet hit my right side and lodged in my spine. The doctors worked tirelessly to save me, and against all odds, they managed to preserve my life. One doctor told me that if the bullet had been just a few centimeters lower, I wouldn't have survived. I didn't know much about anatomy, but I took his word for it and thanked him for saving me. However, my relief was short-lived. When I woke up after surgery, I realized I couldn't feel my legs at all. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, saying I had a 50-50 chance of walking again, but they needed time to know for sure. When I opened my eyes that day, Sarah was sitting beside me. At first, she scolded me for being reckless, then broke down crying. "It hurts me to see you like this," she said. But then she assured me, "Everything will be fine. You'll recover. You'll run again like an athlete." Despite her optimism, I felt hopeless. After the doctor's prognosis, I couldn't bear the thought of becoming a burden to her or anyone else. Confined to a wheelchair, I began questioning everything. Though I'd never believed in God, for some reason, I began to pray. A few days later, I woke up and felt something. A tickle on the big toe of my right foot. When I raised my head, I saw a fly tapping its legs there. I didn't care how it got there. I was just relieved I could move my toe. I shooed the fly away, and that small movement gave me hope. Months passed. The doctors worked tirelessly with me, and eventually, I was able to get around on my own. First with a walker, then with a cane. My kids visited whenever they could, each offering their support in their own way. There was still some discomfort in my back while walking, and the pain radiated down my right leg. The doctors assured me this would improve over time. 2 years later, the pain has significantly reduced, though I still walk with a cane. I had to quit the police force, as patrolling was no longer an option. My chief offered me a desk job at the station, but paperwork wasn't for me, so I declined. When I returned home from the hospital, I noticed some changes in the house. The furniture had been rearranged, and the walls were painted a different color. Even Sarah seemed different. "Did you redecorate?" I asked. "Well, you were in the hospital for a few months," she replied. "I didn't know how things would progress. I needed something to do." "Where's Amanda? I thought she'd come to welcome me." "Oh, I forgot to tell you," Sarah said, hesitating. "Her husband." Amanda's husband had recently been transferred for work, and she went with him. "I don't know how long they'll be away," Sarah said, "but they might come back. In the meantime, they're settling there. Amanda promised to call you once you're home." For the next few months, I stayed at home, recovering. Sarah took care of me, even though I could manage many things on my own. Still, I sensed an unusual tension in the atmosphere, like something had settled in our home while I was away. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the aftermath of my trauma or possibly a side effect of the medication. Not wanting to become a useless fixture on the couch, I decided to try my hand at cooking, something I hadn't done in years. I found a quick online course and began experimenting in the kitchen. At first, my attempts were mediocre. Simple dishes were manageable, but anything complicated was hit or miss. After all, I hadn't held a pan in years. Sarah had always been in charge of cooking, but I kept at it, and over time I improved. Soon, I was creating culinary wonders, even inventing a few recipes of my own. It felt good to have something to focus on. Despite my progress in the kitchen, the strange tension lingered. I noticed Sarah spoke to me less frequently, and when we did talk, there was a nervousness in her voice. I assumed it might have something to do with my health and asked her about it. But Sarah avoided the question, usually replying with, "I'm just tired." I understood she was juggling work, household chores, and a husband who sometimes moaned in pain and woke up from nightmares. Even with all this, Sarah began paying more attention to her appearance. She had always looked good, but now she seemed to go out of her way to dress up. More makeup, styled hair, new outfits. A couple of months ago, she even started coming home in unusually cheerful moods, though it didn't change the fact that she spent less time with me. "You look beautiful," I told her one evening when she came home in a lovely dress with her hair perfectly done. "Really? I just thought I'd try to lift my spirits a bit." "Do you like it?" she asked cautiously. "You know you're always beautiful to me," I replied. Her expression darkened slightly. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Nothing. Never mind. Just forget it," she said, brushing me off and heading to the bedroom to change. I watched her as she walked away. Her stride seemed different, more confident, or perhaps it was just the higher heels she'd been wearing lately. At dinner that night, she was unusually quiet while I told her about my day. "Oh, Amanda called today," I mentioned casually. "She did?" Sarah asked, suddenly interested. "I spoke to her a few days ago." "What did she say?" "She said they can finally come back." Sarah's face lit up at the news, and she suggested we celebrate Amanda's return. But when I mentioned the exact date, her excitement faltered, and she seemed lost in thought. "Is something wrong?" I asked. "No, everything's fine. It's just..." The organization I work for is celebrating its 20th anniversary on that day, and the management is throwing a party. I guess we'll have to plan Amanda's celebration for another day. We'll figure it out, I reassured her. I'm sure Amanda will understand. Sarah nodded, and our evening passed in relative calm. A few days later, Amanda and her husband arrived. Sarah and I decided to surprise them by meeting them at the airport. Amanda didn't hide how much she had missed us and hugged us tightly. We convinced them to come to our house first, where I treated them to dishes I'd spent all day preparing. It was wonderful to hear about their life in the other city and to have the family together again. 2 days later, Sarah began preparing for the work celebration. She chose her best dress, carefully applied makeup, and selected a set of exquisite jewelry. When she was ready, she called a taxi. My son-in-law offered to drive her, but she politely declined, saying she didn't want to trouble them. When the taxi arrived, Sarah left, promising to be home by 10 p.m. I understood why she went alone and hadn't invited me. She didn't want to draw attention to herself by bringing her husband with a cane, which might make her feel out of place. My daughter asked me why I wasn't going with Sarah, and I simply replied, "Dancing isn't on my agenda these days." The kids stayed with me for a while before heading back to their place. I stayed home alone, waiting for Sarah's return. To pass the time, I read magazines, watched TV, and tried to distract myself from the clock. But as the hours passed, I grew uneasy. By 10:30 p.m., Sarah still hadn't returned. By 11 o'clock, I started to worry. By midnight, there was still no sign of her. I called her phone, hoping to find out why she was delayed. The call went unanswered. Half an hour later, I tried again with the same result. My instincts from years on the police force began to kick in. Something felt wrong. I didn't want to alarm the kids unnecessarily, so I decided to figure it out myself. I knew where Sarah's work celebration was being held, so I got into my car and headed there. Pain shot through my leg and back as I pressed the pedal, but I ignored it. Finding my wife was my priority now. I had checked her phone's GPS beforehand and confirmed she was still at the building. When I arrived, I saw that the celebration was still ongoing, but there weren't many people left. Most had likely already gone home. Wandering through the hall, tapping my cane on the tiled floor, I searched for Sarah, but she was nowhere to be seen. I asked a few of the remaining guests if they had seen her, but they were too drunk to care, each absorbed in their own merriment. I checked the GPS tracker again. The dot on the screen indicated that Sarah's phone was still in the building. I ventured further into a long corridor where I noticed several smaller rooms that looked like utility spaces. Beyond the hallway, there was a kitchen, but I decided to start my search here in the corridor. Pushing doors open with my cane, I found storage spaces with boxes and staff uniforms hanging on racks. I kept going, stepping cautiously. Ahead of me, there was a small break room. Inside, I saw a table with a kettle, unwashed cups, crumbs scattered around leftover food, and an ashtray overflowing with cigarette butts. The air smelled stale, and it was clear the space was used often. As I turned a corner, I heard faint sounds, movement, perhaps muffled voices. I followed the noise. What I saw next froze me in place, then filled me with rage. On a small couch under a thin blanket lay my wife. She was undressed, as was the man beside her. Both of them sleeping, clearly more intoxicated than they could handle. It was obvious now why Sarah hadn't come home on time. I didn't shout. Instead, I slammed my cane against the floor with a loud crack. The sound startled the man awake. He squinted at me groggily before nudging Sarah and shaking her shoulder. She opened her eyes, and the moment she saw me standing there, her face paled. She gasped and pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "So, this is how you celebrate an anniversary?" I said, my voice trembling with restrained anger. "Who's this?" The man mumbled groggily, still half asleep. "Husband," Sarah snapped sharply, as if the word was a weapon aimed at me. I stood there, boiling with rage, unable to believe what I was witnessing. Sarah didn't even look ashamed. If anything, she seemed almost relieved that I had caught her. The man tried to get up from the couch, but I swung my cane and struck him hard on the shoulder. He let out a yelp of pain. He tried to lunge at me, but I was ready. I raised my cane again, and when he charged, the end of the cane struck his eye with force. He howled in pain, clutching his face as blood trickled between his fingers. He staggered backward onto the bed, cursing me as he crouched in agony. "So, you traded me for him?" I spat, turning to Sarah, who was hurriedly trying to get dressed. "Troy, have you lost it? What have you done?" she snapped, glancing nervously at her lover. I didn't want to talk to her anymore, though countless questions churned in my mind. Who is this man? How long has this been going on? Why? He was younger than me, closer to Sarah's age, with broad shoulders and a confident demeanor. But after all the years we had spent together, was this all I meant to her? Was she really willing to throw everything away for him? I felt disgusted, not just with her but with the entire situation. Though I wanted to punish the man further, I held back. I knew it could end badly for me. Blinding him in one I had been enough to release some of my anger, but part of me feared what I might do to Sarah in a moment of rage. Would the kids ever forgive me if I went too far? I turned to leave, not wanting to see or hear any more of this mess. But before I could, the wounded man, still clutching his bleeding eye, leapt up and shoved me hard. I fell backward onto a table which collapsed under my weight. The plates and cups on it clattered to the floor, covering me in food scraps and crumbs. Pain shot through my back, the same spot where I had once been wounded by a bullet. Through the haze of pain, I noticed the man scrambling to gather his things. He grabbed his shirt and bolted out of the room, still holding his belongings as he ran. I struggled to sit up, my body aching from the fall. Sarah, now fully dressed, approached me cautiously. I couldn't understand why she was doing this, why she was destroying everything we had built together. Her expression wasn't one of remorse. If anything, it was pity. "What are you doing?" I asked bitterly. "Do you need help getting up? Leave me alone. I'm not disabled," I snapped harshly, gritting my teeth as I tried to stand. But the sharp pain in my back forced me back down, and I ended up leaning against the wall, breathing heavily. Sarah sighed and took out her phone. She began dialing a number. "What? Already missing him?" I asked sarcastically, bitterness dripping from my words. "Stop it," she said firmly. "I'm calling for an ambulance. It's obvious something's not right." Even though I felt repulsed being near Sarah at that moment, I didn't argue with her decision to call an ambulance. I realized I wouldn't be able to get home on my own. While we waited for the ambulance, I couldn't help but ask the question that had been burning in my mind. "Why, Sarah? Why did you do this?" She hesitated, avoiding my gaze. "Troy, I don't know how to explain this. Matt and we've known each other for a long time. We went to college together. We even dated briefly, but then we went our separate ways. That was before you and 2 years ago, he joined our department." Her voice wavered as she continued. "I don't know how fate brought us back together. You were in the hospital at the time, Troy. I was so sad and lonely. I didn't even know if you'd survive. And he was just there." Her words trailed off and she looked down. "So, what you're saying is you've been involved with him for 2 years?" My voice cracked with disbelief. Sarah nodded silently, her face full of shame. I was overwhelmed with anger. You! I swung my cane toward her, but Sarah saw it coming and dodged just in time. I'm sorry, Troy. We had a good life, but now… I love him, she said softly before turning and walking away. The hospital kept me for 2 days. The doctors performed several procedures, put me on 4 drips, and made sure I was stable before allowing me to go home. During that time, Amanda and her husband visited me. Amanda had called on the first morning, concerned about how I was doing. I admitted that I was in the hospital, but didn't tell her about the altercation with Sarah's lover. I simply said I had tripped and fallen. Amanda was sympathetic and sincere, but as much as her words comforted me, I couldn't shake the emotional pain. I kept thinking about how she would react when she found out the truth, that her mother and I were splitting up. After everything, I couldn't stay with Sarah anymore. Too much had been broken. When I was discharged from the hospital, Amanda came to help me. As we entered the house, there was Sarah, sitting in the kitchen as if nothing had happened. She hadn't visited me in the hospital, nor had she called to check on me. I shot her a hateful glance as I walked past her and headed straight to the living room. Amanda helped me settle onto the couch and immediately sensed the tension in the air. "Dad, what's going on between you and Mom?" she asked cautiously. "What do you mean, honey?" I tried to feign ignorance. "It's like a black cat has run between you two." "More like a tomcat," I retorted bitterly. "What?" Amanda asked, confused. "Ask your mom instead. I think she has something to tell you," I said, leaning back on the couch. "I could use some rest." Amanda gave me a lingering, concerned look before heading into the kitchen. From the couch, I could see Sarah stand, walk to the door, and close it behind her. The two of them talked for a long time, but I couldn't make out most of what they were saying. Occasionally, I heard Amanda's voice rise, filled with anger and disbelief. Eventually, the kitchen door opened, and Amanda emerged, tears streaming down her face. She rushed toward me, hugging me tightly. "Dad, please, forgive Mom. Forget everything, as if it were just a bad dream," she pleaded through her sobs. Her words broke my heart. Perhaps some men could have forgiven and moved on, but I couldn't. Sarah had admitted her affair had been going on for years, and that she had given up on me as soon as I was hospitalized with my injury. There was nothing left to salvage. I gently pushed Amanda away and said, "Honey, I can't forgive her. I don't want to. I've tried to make this work for years, but this is too much." Amanda didn't want to leave, but I eventually convinced her to go home, saying I needed to talk to Sarah alone. After seeing Amanda off, Sarah came into the room. She stood in the doorway for a moment before finally speaking. "Troy, I know you'll never be able to forgive me. I'll leave soon. You won't have to see me anymore." "What's done is done," I replied, my voice hollow. "I'd rather leave myself. Everything here reminds me of you." "Troy," she started, but I cut her off. "Get out of my sight before I do something we'll both regret," I warned her coldly. Sarah nodded silently and left the room. A few days later, I moved in with Amanda and her husband. They sheltered me while I searched for a place of my own. Amanda told me repeatedly that I wasn't a burden and could stay with them for as long as I wanted, even forever. But I didn't want to intrude. They were a young family with their own lives, and I didn't want to disrupt that. Sarah, on the other hand, stayed in our old house. Not only that, she brought her lover there. Rumors began to spread that they often threw parties. I was disgusted but refused to let it affect me any further. Within a week, I found a decent one-bedroom apartment far from my former home and decided to settle there. The neighbors were kind and welcoming. I spent time outside on the bench near my building, slowly getting to know some of them. Across from my new apartment lived a woman who had been divorced for many years and worked as a nurse. She seemed quite lonely and was clearly trying to build a friendship with me. After learning about my injury, she even offered to stop by to take my blood pressure. I didn't mind her company. We discovered we shared a few common interests and always had something to talk about. Nevertheless, I still had to return to the old house occasionally to retrieve some belongings necessary for daily life. I tried to pick times when I knew Sarah and Matt wouldn't be home. Deep down, I was still angry with them, and I wasn't sure I could stop myself from punching Matt again if I ran into him. The second time I went to the house, I noticed 2 police cars parked outside, and the front door was wide open. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered nearby, watching the scene unfold. Realizing something had happened, I got out of the car and hurried toward the house as quickly as I could, using my cane for support. At the entrance, a police officer stopped me. "You can't go in," he said. "But I used to live here," I explained. "I'm Sarah Evans' ex-husband." In the corridor, I spotted my former police partner, Joe, and called out to him. He recognized me immediately and instructed the officer to let me through. "What happened here?" I asked anxiously, fearing the worst. I headed toward the living room, where I could hear voices. Joe shrugged. "Nothing too serious, just a robbery." "A robbery?" I asked, bewildered. Without waiting for an answer, I stepped into the living room. There, on the couch, sat Sarah, her face tear-stained and bruised. When she saw me, her first impulse was to throw herself into my arms for comfort. But when she noticed my stern expression, she realized it would be futile. I stood beside her, keeping my distance. "So what happened? Couldn't your beloved protect you?" Sarah wiped her tears and looked away. "It was him," she said quietly. "Matt. He did it." I almost laughed at the irony. "He robbed you?" Sarah nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I believed in him so much, Troy. I was so stupid. I didn't see this coming." I crossed my arms, my anger boiling just beneath the surface. "What exactly happened?" Sarah began recounting the events. Earlier that morning, she had walked into the bedroom and found Matt stuffing her jewelry and cash into a bag. When she confronted him, he went into a rage and attacked her, hitting her hard enough to knock her unconscious. She had only regained consciousness a short time before calling the police. I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. She had chosen this path, and now she was reaping what she had sown. I wanted to tell her she deserved it, but I stayed silent. Returning to Joe, I asked if I could check on the rest of my belongings. He nodded and whispered something to one of his assistants before telling me to go ahead. I started with the garage, relieved to find everything there intact. I wasn't concerned about my savings. I had taken all my money with me when I left. Clothes didn't matter much either. I doubted Matt had any use for items that weren't his size. But I was worried about an antique set in the sideboard, an heirloom from my grandmother that was quite valuable. I headed to the sideboard and opened the doors. My heart sank. The antique set and several smaller figurines were missing. I reported this to the officers, and they noted it down. After packing a few other belongings into a bag, I prepared to leave. "Wait!" Sarah called out suddenly. I turned, curious about what she wanted. "Troy, forgive me," she said, her voice trembling. "I acted so foolishly. Please don't go. Come back." I looked at her tear-streaked face, but I felt no sympathy. "You're a fool," I said coldly, and without another word, I turned and walked out the door. I never returned to that house again, not even for the few items I had left behind. I doubted they would recover my grandmother's set, but just in case, I left my new address with Joe. Back at my apartment, I focused on rebuilding my life. Amanda and her husband visited me often. My daughter genuinely cared about me, but whenever she brought up her mother, I firmly asked her to stop. I didn't want to hear anything about Sarah. To keep myself busy, I continued developing my new hobby of cooking. I had plenty of time to experiment and refine my skills. One day, I stopped by a cafe near the park to sit outside and enjoy some juice. As I placed my order, I heard a familiar voice. Turning around, I saw an old acquaintance, a man who had once ventured into the restaurant business, but eventually found his passion as a chef. We were both delighted to see each other. He even insisted that my order was on the house. Over the conversation, he admitted he had finally achieved some success in his career. I shared a bit about my own situation and mentioned that I had started dabbling in cooking. When he learned I was currently unemployed, he offered me a job as a chef in his restaurant. "At least give it a try and show me what you can do," he said. I hesitated, explaining that my old injury still caused me problems. But he reassured me it wouldn't be an issue, as I wouldn't need to be on my feet all the time. After some thought, I agreed to give it a shot. Things started looking up for me. My daughter became pregnant, and I was eagerly awaiting another grandchild. One day, after returning home from a shift at work and just sitting down to relax, the phone rang. It was Joe calling. He told me they had caught Matt and thought I'd want to know. "Figured you'd want to meet him," Joe said knowingly. It was good news, and I wasted no time heading to the police station. When I arrived, I met Joe first. He couldn't miss the sly smile on my face and immediately knew I wasn't there just for a casual chat. "Where is he? Can I see him? I'd like to have a few words with him," I asked. Joe hesitated, then said, "I'll take you to him, but don't go overboard. I've got enough on my plate, and I don't want to have to clean up after you. Do you think anyone here would say anything against me?" I replied with a knowing grin. During my years on the force, I'd built strong relationships with my colleagues and the chief. Even if I gave the scumbag a couple of punches, I was confident everyone would testify that he fell on his own. Did he say why he did it? Didn't they seem to have love? I asked sarcastically. Joe shook his head. Apparently, he's done this kind of thing before. He starts romances, earns trust, then robs them. This time, Sarah woke up earlier than he expected and caught him before he could escape. That's how he got caught. Joe led me to the interrogation room, leaning in to whisper, "There's no one behind the mirror right now. You can talk calmly." I entered the room and saw Matt handcuffed to the table. A bandage covered his eye from our last encounter. He glared at me, as if ready to lunge at my throat. "Come to take a good look at me?" he hissed. "At least I can look properly," I replied, placing my cane on the table in front of me. You could see the weariness in Matt's eye. Now, standing in front of him, alone, with no witnesses and the upper hand, I burned with the desire to teach him a lesson. After a long pause, I raised my cane and swung it with all my force. Not at Matt, but at the table near his chained hands. The loud crack of the cane against the table echoed in the small room, followed by a silence that seemed to stretch forever. That silence was soon broken by an unpleasant smell. Matt, who had always been a hero against the weak and helpless, was now utterly terrified. He had wet himself. I stepped back, my eyes falling on the wet spot on his jumpsuit. He trembled in fear, his earlier bravado completely gone. Finally, I turned and walked toward the door. As I reached it, Matt seemed to regain his voice. He began shouting insults and threats, claiming he'd get to me someday. I didn't bother responding. He wasn't worth it. Before leaving, I asked Joe to ensure Matt ended up in a maximum security ward. Joe promised he'd handle it. Not long after, the police recovered my grandmother's antique set. I carefully took it back to my apartment, a small but meaningful victory. Sarah, now completely alone, tried contacting me several more times. She claimed I was the most valuable thing in her life and begged for forgiveness. But I couldn't. The pain she caused me had faded over time, helped by the love and support of my children. But I couldn't forget. Eventually, I was able to talk about Sarah with my kids, who told me how deeply she regretted what she had done. At one point, I almost pitied her, but there was no turning back. Several years have passed since then. I grew close to my neighbor, the nurse. She turned out to be a very decent person. Though I wasn't sure I could ever fully trust someone again, she never gave me a reason to doubt her. She was even 2 years older than me, but age didn't matter. As for Sarah, she never remarried or dated anyone else. Instead, she devoted all her love to her children and grandchildren. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to JK Tells a Story for more tales.